A gentle breeze carried the scent of expensive perfume through the modernist office space of Montero Technologies, where Isabel Montero stood, gazing out floor-to-ceiling windows at the San Francisco skyline. Her reflection showed a woman in her early 30s, impeccably dressed in a tailored Chanel suit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and determined brown eyes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her corner office, filled with awards and accolades that marked her meteoric rise in the tech industry. She absentmindedly twisted the rose gold Apple Watch on her wrist, a habit she developed during long board meetings. The device buzzed with another notification, probably another acquisition offer from a rival company, or perhaps another invitation to speak at a prestigious tech conference. At 34, Isabel had achieved what most people spent their entire lives pursuing: wealth, power, and influence. The intercom buzzed and her assistant's voice filtered through. "Ms. Montero, your 5 p.m. is here. Mr. Lucas Bennett and the others are waiting in the conference room." Isabel smiled, collecting her tablet. Lucas and their circle of friends, all successful entrepreneurs and executives, had their monthly strategy session, which had evolved over the years into more of a social gathering where they discussed everything from market trends to their personal lives. These meetings were one of the few times Isabel felt she could let her guard down, even if only slightly. The conference room hummed with quiet conversation as she entered. Lucas, dressed in his signature Steve Jobs-inspired black turtleneck, was the first to notice her. "There's our resident workaholic," he called out, raising his glass of sparkling water. "Please tell me you're joining us for dinner after this. Some of us actually run our companies instead of delegating everything." Isabel shot back with a smirk, settling in her usual chair at the head of the table. The banter was familiar, comfortable, a dance they perfected over years of friendship and rivalry. The conversation flowed easily, moving from business strategies to personal investments, until Sarah, one of the newer members of their circle, brought up her recent divorce. "I swear, dating in our circle is impossible," she sighed, swirling her drink. "Everyone's either looking for a merger or trying to sell you something." Lucas leaned forward, a mischievous glint in his eye. "That's because you're fishing in the same pond, darling. Maybe we should all try dating outside our tax bracket for a change." The group laughed, but Isabel felt a strange twist in her stomach. She'd never considered dating someone who wasn't part of their world. Her relationships had always been strategic, calculated moves that benefited both parties, more like business mergers than love affairs. "I'm serious," Lucas continued, looking directly at Isabel. "When was the last time any of us had a genuine connection with someone who wasn't trying to climb the corporate ladder?" The question hung in the air, and Isabel found herself thinking about her last few relationships, all with successful entrepreneurs or executives, all ending in carefully worded press releases about mutual separation and maintaining professional relationships. "It's not about tax brackets," she argued, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "It's about compatibility, understanding each other's worlds." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Is it? Or is it about control? Face it, Belle, you wouldn't last a week dating someone who didn't care about your net worth or your company's stock price." The challenge in his voice was clear, and something stirred in Isabel, that familiar competitive spirit that had driven her to build her empire. "You think I couldn't handle dating someone normal?" she asked, making air quotes around the word. "I think you couldn't handle not being in control," Lucas replied. "Your whole life is about power and influence. You wouldn't know what to do with someone who wasn't impressed by all of this." He gestured around the luxurious conference room. The other members of the group watched the exchange with interest, and Isabel felt her pride kick in. "Try me," she said, her voice taking on the same tone she used in high-stakes negotiations. Lucas grinned, knowing he'd hooked her. "All right, how about this? You have to date and marry someone who makes less than $50,000 a year. Someone who has no idea who you really are. No revealing your wealth, your position, nothing. Let's see how you handle being loved or rejected for who you are, not what you own." The room fell silent. It was absurd, of course. A billionaire CEO pretending to be ordinary, dating someone from a completely different world. But Isabel had never backed down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. "Terms?" she asked, shifting into business mode. 6 months, Lucas proposed. If you can maintain a genuine relationship without revealing your true identity and get married within that time frame, I'll donate 50 million to the charity of your choice. If you fail, either by revealing yourself or by not making it to marriage, you donate the same amount to mine. Isabel should have taken more time to consider it. Should have thought about the implications, the potential complications, the sheer impossibility of maintaining such a deception. But the challenge sang in her blood, and before she could stop herself, she was reaching across the table to shake Lucas's hand. "Deal," she said firmly, ignoring the surprised murmurs from the others. "But I get to choose the person." Lucas shook his head. "No, that would be too easy. You'd find someone ambitious, someone looking to climb. I get to choose." The next evening found them in an unexpected location, a McDonald's in one of the city's working-class neighborhoods. Isabel felt distinctly out of place in her casual clothes, which still probably cost more than most people's entire wardrobe. Lucas had insisted they come here, claiming he'd already spotted the perfect candidate. "There," Lucas said quietly, nodding toward the counter. "Daniel Oliveira, 28 years old, works 2 jobs to support his family. No college degree, no trust fund, no ambitions beyond taking care of his mother and siblings. Everything you're not." Isabel followed his gaze to a young man behind the counter. He was handsome in an understated way, with warm brown eyes and a genuine smile as he helped customers. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet dignity that caught her attention. "He works here during the day and picks up evening shifts at a local diner," Lucas continued. "Lives in a small apartment with his mother and 2 younger siblings. Father passed away a few years ago, leaving him as the primary provider." "How do you know all this?" Isabel asked, suspicious. Lucas shrugged. "I have my ways. The point is, he's exactly what you need for this challenge. Someone real. Someone who hasn't been corrupted by our world of quarterly reports and stock options." Watching Daniel interact with customers, Isabel felt a flicker of doubt. This wasn't just a business deal or a strategic move. This was someone's life, someone's heart. But then she caught Lucas's knowing smirk, and her determination hardened. "Fine," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Daniel Oliveira it is." What Isabel didn't know as she watched Daniel that evening was that she was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, success, and happiness. Daniel Oliveira wasn't just going to be her ticket to winning a bet. He was going to be the person who would turn her carefully constructed world upside down. As the evening wore on, Isabel observed Daniel more closely. She noticed how he handled difficult customers with patience and grace, how he seemed to know the regular customers by name, asking about their families or jobs. There was a genuine warmth to him that she rarely encountered in her world of calculated networking and strategic alliances. The challenge ahead seemed both simpler and more complicated than she'd initially thought. Simple, because Daniel appeared to be exactly the kind of genuine, straightforward person Lucas had described. Complicated, because for the first time in her life, Isabel would have to present herself without the shield of her wealth and status. As they left the McDonald's that evening, Lucas turned to her with a serious expression. "Remember, Belle, this isn't just about winning a bet. This is about proving you can connect with someone on a human level without all the trappings of power and wealth. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Isabel looked back through the window at Daniel, who was now cleaning tables with the same care and attention he'd shown while serving customers. "I'm ready," she said, even as a small voice in her head wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. What she didn't realize was that this challenge would become much more than a simple bet. It would become a journey of self-discovery, one that would force her to question everything she thought she knew about success, happiness, and love. As she walked to her car, a deliberately modest Honda Civic she'd purchased for this charade, Isabel began to plan her approach, unaware that her carefully constructed plan was about to collide with something she'd never truly experienced before: genuine human connection. The world of Daniel Oliveira couldn't have been more different from Isabel's. While she spent her evenings in penthouses and exclusive clubs, he finished his shift at McDonald's only to head to his second job at Maria's Diner, a small family-owned restaurant where he worked until closing time. His hands were calloused from work, his shoes worn from standing all day, but his spirit remained unbroken. That night, As Daniel walked home through the quiet streets of his neighborhood, the weight of his responsibilities pressed heavily on his shoulders. The rent was due soon. His youngest sister needed new school supplies, and his mother's arthritis medication wasn't covered by their insurance. Yet he maintained the same gentle smile he'd worn all day, knowing that somewhere in this struggle, there was purpose and dignity. The small two-bedroom apartment he shared with his family was dark when he arrived home, save for a small light in the kitchen. His mother, Elena, was still awake, waiting for him with a plate of leftover rice and beans. "May, you should be sleeping," he said in Portuguese, kissing her cheek. Elena waved away his concern. "I wanted to make sure you ate something proper today. Fast food is not real food, meu filho." As Daniel sat at the small kitchen table, he thought about the strange woman he'd noticed watching him at work earlier. She'd been trying to look casual, but there was something about her that seemed out of place, like a swan among pigeons. He'd seen enough wealthy people slumming it in his neighborhood to recognize the signs. The too perfect casual clothes, the carefully maintained nonchalance, the way she held herself as if the vinyl booth might bite. What he didn't know was that this woman would soon become a central figure in his life, challenging his perceptions and opening his heart to possibilities he'd never considered. But for now, he simply ate his mother's cooking, grateful for the love it represented, unaware that his world was about to change dramatically. The next morning, as Daniel prepared for another day at McDonald's, Isabel was crafting her strategy. She'd spent half the night researching common jobs and backgrounds that would explain her ability to afford a modest but comfortable lifestyle without raising suspicions. She settled on being a mid-level marketing manager at a small firm, enough to explain her business acumen and communication skills, but not so impressive as to raise eyebrows. She dressed carefully in clothes she'd bought from Target and Gap, removing her usual designer accessories and replacing them with more modest alternatives. Looking in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. And that, she realized, was exactly the point. The challenge had begun, and neither Daniel nor Isabel could have predicted how their lives would intertwine, how their preconceptions would be challenged, or how genuine feelings would complicate what had started as a simple bet. As the sun rose over San Francisco, two very different worlds were about to collide, and nothing would ever be the same. The next morning dawned crisp and bright over San Francisco, painting the city's iconic hills in shades of gold and amber. Daniel arrived early for his shift at McDonald's, tying his apron with practiced efficiency as he listened to his coworker Maria complain about the morning rush that would soon descend upon them. He nodded sympathetically, though his mind kept drifting to the mysterious woman from yesterday. Something about her had seemed both intriguing and slightly off, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Isabel, meanwhile, had spent hours perfecting her approach. She created a detailed backstory for her alter ego, Sarah Martinez, a marketing manager at a small firm downtown. She'd even gone so far as to create a LinkedIn profile with carefully curated job history and connections. The attention to detail was something she'd learned in business. Success often lay in the small things others overlooked. When she walked into McDonald's that morning, she'd transformed herself. Gone were the designer labels and perfectly manicured appearance. Instead, she wore simple jeans from Target, a plain white t-shirt, and minimal makeup. Her usually straight hair fell in natural waves around her shoulders. She'd even practiced changing her walk, softening the commanding stride that had become second nature. Daniel noticed her immediately, though he tried not to show it. She was back, this time alone, and something about her seemed different from yesterday. Less like she was observing a foreign culture, and more like she belonged. She ordered a coffee and breakfast sandwich, then settled into a corner booth with a laptop, a mid-range model. He noted not the cutting-edge technology he usually saw with the tech crowd that sometimes wandered in. Hours passed, and she remained, occasionally getting refills, typing away at what appeared to be work emails. Daniel found himself stealing glances between customers, curious despite himself. During a lull in service, she approached the counter, and he felt his heart skip a beat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice softer than he'd expected. "Would you happen to know if there's a good coffee shop around here? One where I could work for a few hours?" She gestured at her laptop. "I just started a new job in the area, and I'm still learning my way around. The lie rolled off Isabel's tongue smoothly, but something about Daniel's direct gaze made her feel unexpectedly self-conscious. His brown eyes seemed to look right through her carefully constructed facade, though his smile remained professional and warm. Actually, he replied, there's a great little place called the Bean Scene about 2 blocks down. They have better coffee than we do. Don't tell my manager I said that. And lots of people work from there. Isabel laughed and was surprised to find it wasn't forced. Your secret's safe with me. Thanks. She glanced at his name tag, pretending she hadn't memorized it days ago. Daniel. No problem. He paused, raising an eyebrow slightly. Sarah, she supplied, the alias feeling strange on her tongue. I am Sarah. A customer called for service, and Daniel turned away with an apologetic smile. Isabel returned to her booth, heart racing slick. HDLY. It was a small interaction, barely worth noting, but it was a start. She hadn't expected the genuine warmth in his smile or the intelligence in his eyes. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps she was underestimating the complexity of the task ahead. Over the next few weeks, Isabel, or Sarah, as she was now known, became a regular at both McDonald's and the Bean Scene. She carefully crafted her appearances around Daniel's schedule, which she'd memorized from her initial surveillance. She kept her interactions light and friendly, gradually building a rapport that felt surprisingly natural. She learned that Daniel had a dry sense of humor that emerged in quiet moments between customers. She discovered that he spoke Portuguese with his family, that he loved science fiction books, and that he had an uncanny ability to remember every regular customer's usual order. Each new detail made him more real, more human, and increasingly harder to think of as just a means to win a bet. Daniel, for his part, found himself looking forward to Sarah's visits. There was something about her that didn't quite add up. Moments when her carefully casual demeanor slipped, revealing glimpses of someone else underneath. But those glimpses only made her more intriguing. He noticed how she really listened when people spoke, how her eyes lit up during their brief conversations about books or movies, and how she never treated him with the condescension he often faced from customers. One rainy afternoon, about a month into their acquaintance, Sarah's laptop refused to connect to the McDonald's Wi-Fi. Daniel, on his break, offered to help. As they huddled over the computer, shoulders almost touching, he caught a whiff of her perfume. Subtle but expensive, he thought, though he couldn't have said why he knew that. Their fingers brushed as she pointed to the screen, and both pretended not to notice the spark of electricity that passed between them. You know, Daniel said after fixing the connection, the Bean Scene has more reliable Wi-Fi. And better coffee, like I said. He hesitated, then added, I actually stop there sometimes after my shift. Around 6, if you're ever there then. Isabel felt her heart race at the subtle invitation. This was what she'd been working toward, wasn't it? Then why did it make her feel so nervous, like a teenager being asked to the prom? I might be, she replied, trying to keep her voice casual. Their lattes are pretty good. That evening, Isabel found herself changing outfits 3 times before heading to the Bean Scene. She'd never felt this uncertain about her appearance before, not even before major press conferences or board meetings. She finally settled on a simple sweater and jeans, then spent 10 minutes messing with her hair to make it look artfully tousled rather than the sleek style she preferred. Daniel was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He'd changed out of his McDonald's uniform into jeans and a well-worn leather jacket that somehow made him look both more relaxed and more handsome. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her stomach flip. I took a chance and ordered you a latte, he said as she sat down. Hope that's okay. It was perfect, actually, though not nearly as expensive or complicated as her usual coffee order. But as she took a sip and watched Daniel's hands wrap around his own cup, she found she didn't miss her usual $15 artisanal brew at all. They talked for hours, losing track of time as they shared stories and opinions. Daniel told her about his family, his mother's incredible cooking, his sister's dreams of becoming a doctor, his brother's talent for art. Isabel found herself sharing too, carefully edited versions of her life that nevertheless contained more truth than she'd expected. She told him about growing up with ambitious parents, about feeling like nothing she did was ever quite good enough, the loneliness of always being the one in charge. As they walked out into the cool evening air, Daniel hesitated. I know this might seem forward, he said, but would you like to have dinner sometime? There's this great little Portuguese restaurant my family goes to. Nothing fancy, but the food is amazing. Isabel felt a moment of panic. A real date. A restaurant where she'd have to maintain her cover while sharing a meal. Where they might talk about more personal things. Where she'd have to be even more careful about her story. Where she might have to face the growing realization that what had started as a challenge was becoming something else entirely. I'd love to, she heard herself say, and the smile that spread across Daniel's face made her heart ache with a mixture of joy and guilt. As she drove home that night in her modest Honda, Isabel found herself gripping the steering wheel too tightly, her mind racing. This was supposed to be simple, a challenge to prove Lucas wrong, a game to show she could connect with someone outside her world. But as she replayed the evening in her mind, she couldn't ignore the way her pulse had quickened when Daniel smiled, or how natural it had felt to talk with him, or how much she wanted to know more about him. For the first time since accepting Lucas's challenge, Isabel felt truly scared, not of failing the bet, but of succeeding in a way she hadn't anticipated. Because sitting there in the bean scene, listening to Daniel talk about his dreams and struggles, she'd forgotten about the challenge entirely. She'd forgotten about her real identity, about the millions in her bank account, about the companies she controlled. For those few hours, she'd just been Sarah, a woman enjoying coffee with a man who made her laugh and think and feel more alive than she had in years. The realization hit her as she pulled into her garage. She was in danger of falling for Daniel Oliveira, and that wasn't part of the plan at all. This wasn't supposed to be real. It was supposed to be a calculated move, a strategic play, another challenge to conquer. But as she lay in bed that night, in her penthouse apartment that cost more than Daniel would make in a lifetime, she couldn't stop thinking about the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, or how passionate he became when talking about his family, or how gentle his hands had looked wrapped around that coffee cup. The next morning, Isabel sat in her home office, staring at her phone. Lucas had texted, asking for an update on the project. The words made her feel slightly nauseated. How could she reduce what was happening to a simple project status? How could she explain that somewhere between the careful planning and the executed strategy, something real had begun to grow? But she couldn't back out now. The bet was made, the challenge accepted. And more importantly, she couldn't bear the thought of not seeing Daniel again, of not hearing more of his stories, of not being part of his world, even if it was under false pretenses. She would have to find a way to navigate this growing attraction while maintaining her deception, all while knowing that every genuine moment between them was built on a foundation of lies. As she prepared for another day of being Sarah Martinez, Isabel caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Not because of the casual clothes or the minimal makeup, but because of the look in her eyes, a mixture of hope and fear that she'd never seen there before. She was playing a dangerous game, and her heart was no longer just a spectator. The Portuguese restaurant Daniel had mentioned turned out to be a small, family-owned place tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. The tables were covered in checkered cloths, the walls decorated with old photographs of Lisbon, and the air was thick with the scent of garlic and herbs. It was exactly the kind of place Isabel would have never set foot in before, and yet somehow, sitting across from Daniel in the warm, intimate space, it felt perfect. My mom knows the owners, Daniel explained as he helped her navigate the menu. They're from the same region in Portugal. She says their bacalhau au bras tastes just like her grandmother used to make. Isabel watched as he spoke with the waitress in fluid Portuguese, his face animated and comfortable. This was his world, a world of personal connections, of shared histories, of food made with love rather than pretension. It was so different from her world of corporate dining rooms and Michelin-starred restaurants, and yet she found herself feeling more at ease here than she had in years. The food arrived, simple but beautifully prepared, and Daniel watched with obvious pleasure as she took her first bite. "Good?" he asked, and she nodded, genuinely impressed by the complex flavors. "Amazing," she said truthfully. "I've never had Portuguese food like this before." They talked as they ate, and Isabel found herself relaxing into the conversation. Daniel told her about his father, how he'd worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, how he'd always found time to help with homework or attend school events, how his sudden death had left a void that still ached years later. He always said that wealth isn't about what you own, Daniel said, his eyes distant with memory. It's about what you give to your family, to your community, to the world. He didn't have much in terms of money, but he was the richest person I knew in terms of love and respect. Isabel felt the words hit her like a physical blow. Here she was with more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes, playing at being ordinary while sitting across from someone who understood true wealth in a way she never had. The guilt was almost overwhelming, but mixed with it was something else, a desperate desire to be worthy of the way Daniel was looking at her, to be someone who could understand and share his values rather than just pretend to. The evening continued, and with each passing moment, Isabel felt herself falling deeper into a trap of her own making. When Daniel reached across the table to wipe a bit of sauce from her chin, his touch gentle and familiar, she had to resist the urge to tell him everything. When he spoke about his dreams for his siblings' education, she had to sit on her hands to keep from offering to pay for everything right then and there. But it was when they were walking back to their cars, the night air cool and fragrant with jasmine, that Isabel realized just how much trouble she was in. Daniel stopped under a streetlight, turned to her, and without any preamble or pretense, kissed her. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, but it sent electricity coursing through her entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes searching hers, she saw everything she'd been afraid of: sincerity, hope, the beginning of something real. "I know this might seem fast," he said, his voice slightly husky, "but there's something about you, Sarah. Something that feels right." Isabel felt tears pricking at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. Everything about this moment was perfect, except for the name he'd used. The name that wasn't hers, the identity that was a carefully constructed lie. She wanted to be Sarah in that moment. Wanted it more than she'd ever wanted anything. Wanted to be the person he saw when he looked at her with such warmth and trust. "It feels right to me, too," she whispered, and at least that wasn't a lie. Nothing had ever felt more right or more terrifyingly complicated. As she drove home that night, Isabel's mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The taste of Daniel's kiss lingered on her lips, but the sweetness was tainted by the bitter knowledge of her deception. She thought about Lucas and the bet, about the carefully laid plans that had seemed so simple weeks ago. None of it seemed to matter anymore, not compared to the way Daniel's eyes lit up when he talked about his family, or how his hand had felt holding hers, or how he saw the world with such clarity and purpose. But what could she do? Tell him the truth and risk losing him forever? Continue the charade and build their relationship on a foundation of lies? Every option seemed impossible, yet doing nothing was equally unthinkable. For the first time in her life, Isabel Montero, the woman who always had a strategy, who never entered a situation without an exit plan, found herself completely lost. The weeks that followed were a strange dance of growing closeness and mounting guilt. Isabel fell into a routine of living two lives. Her mornings and evenings as Sarah, spending time with Daniel, and her afternoons as herself, running her company and maintaining her other relationships. The contrast between the two worlds became increasingly stark and increasingly difficult to navigate. With Daniel, she discovered a different kind of life. They spent weekends exploring his neighborhood, trying food from local vendors, watching street musicians perform. He took her to community events where everyone seemed to know each other, where children played in the streets and old women gossiped on porches. She met his family, his mother Elena, who insisted on feeding her until she thought she would burst, his sister Maria, who showed her proud acceptance letters from community college, his brother Tom, who shared his artwork with shy pride. In these moments, Isabel felt herself changing. The things that had once seemed so important, designer labels, exclusive memberships, the careful cultivation of influence, began to feel hollow compared to the genuine connections she was forming. She watched Daniel interact with his world. The way he helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, how he mentored local kids, how he managed to remain optimistic despite the constant struggle to make ends meet, and felt herself learning what it truly meant to be wealthy in the ways that mattered. But the guilt was always there. a constant companion that grew heavier with each passing day. Every genuine moment between them was shadowed by her deception. Every time Daniel opened up to her, shared another piece of his life and heart, she felt the weight of her lies more keenly. The worst part was that she was falling in love with him. Truly, deeply, terrifyingly in love, and she knew that when the truth came out, she might lose everything that had come to matter most. The weight of her deception began manifesting in unexpected ways. During board meetings, Isabel found herself distracted, wondering what Daniel would think of the million-dollar decisions she made with casual waves of her hand. When her executive team presented plans for automated systems that would eliminate thousands of service industry jobs, she thought of Daniel's co-workers at McDonald's. Maria with 3 kids at home, Jorge putting himself through night school, Sarah saving for her mother's surgery. For the first time, these weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were real people with real lives. Lucas noticed the change in her during their regular gatherings. "You're different," he observed one evening, catching her alone on the balcony of his penthouse. "The bet's affecting you more than I expected." Isabel couldn't meet his eyes. "It's not about the bet anymore," she admitted, watching the city lights below. "Daniel, he's extraordinary, Lucas. Not in the way we measure success, but in ways that actually matter. He works 2 jobs, takes care of his family, helps his community, and still manages to be kind and optimistic. He makes me want to be better." "You're falling for him," Lucas stated. "Not a question, but a revelation." "I already have," she whispered, and saying it aloud made it more real than ever. "And I don't know what to do." Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Daniel introduced her to his whole world, weekend family. Why dinners where Elena taught her to make feijoada, community cleanup days where they worked alongside neighbors to beautify their streets, quiet evenings in his small apartment playing board games with his siblings. Isabel found herself loving these simple moments more than any luxury she'd ever known. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape of his building sharing a pint of ice cream, Daniel opened up about his fears. "Sometimes I worry I'm not doing enough," he confessed, staring out at the sunset. "Mom needs better health care. Maria deserves a full college experience, not just community college classes between work shifts. Tom's art supplies cost more than our grocery budget some months. I want to give them everything, but..." Isabel's heart ached. She could solve all these problems with a single phone call, transfer more money than they'd ever need with a few clicks. Instead, she reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. "You do so much," she said softly. "Your family knows that. They're proud of you. I see it in their eyes every time they look at you." He squeezed her hand, and she saw tears in his eyes. "Thank you for understanding," he murmured. "Most people just tell me to get a better job or go back to school. As if it's that simple." That night, lying in her king-sized bed in her penthouse, Isabel made a decision. She would tell him the truth. Consequences be damned. She began planning how to reveal everything gradually. First about her job, then her wealth, finally about the bet that had brought them together. She would explain how it had started as a game, but become the most real thing in her life. But before she could put her plan into action, fate intervened in the cruelest way possible. During a charity gala she couldn't avoid attending, a photo of her was published in a business magazine. The article praised her recent acquisition of a rival tech company, mentioning her net worth and featuring a picture of her in designer evening wear, looking every inch the billionaire CEO she was. Maria, Daniel's sister, saw the magazine while working at her part-time job at a newsstand. She recognized Sarah immediately and, shocked by the discovery, called Daniel. The confrontation happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Daniel had asked her to meet him at their usual coffee shop, but his message had seemed odd, terse. When she arrived, she found him sitting alone at a corner table, the magazine laid out before him. "Interesting article," he said as she approached, his voice carefully controlled. "Isabel Montero, CEO of Montero Technologies. Net worth estimated at $4.8 billion. He looked up at her, and the pain in his eyes nearly brought her to her knees. "Were you ever going to tell me the truth? Or was I just part of some sick social experiment?" "Daniel, please let me explain," she began, her heart racing. "Yes, it started as something else, But what happened between us, what I feel for you, that's real. Real. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. What's real about any of this? Even your name is a lie. Was anything you told me true? Or was this all just some game to see how the other half lives? The coffee shop had gone quiet, other patrons pretending not to watch the drama unfolding. Isabel felt tears running down her face, but couldn't bring herself to care about maintaining appearances anymore. Everything I feel for you is true, she insisted. I fell in love with you, Daniel. That wasn't part of the plan, but it happened, and it's the most real thing I've ever felt. Love! He stood up, pushing his chair back with enough force to make it scrape loudly against the floor. Love is built on trust. Love is honest. What you did, that's not love. That's manipulation. You played with my life, my family's lives like we were characters in some story you were writing. Please. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away as if her touch burned. I was going to tell you ever. You think. I was trying to figure out how. Save it, he cut her off. Go back to your real life, Isabel. We both know that's where you belong. He walked out, leaving her standing there with the magazine and a cold cup of coffee. Through her tears, she could see her own face staring up from the glossy pages, smiling confidently in a world that suddenly felt empty and meaningless. The days that followed were a blur of pain and regret. Isabel threw herself into work, trying to lose herself in spreadsheets and meetings, but everything reminded her of Daniel. She found herself driving past McDonald's, past his apartment building, past all the places they'd made memories together. She sent messages that went unanswered, left voicemails that were never returned. Elena called her once, not to condemn, but to understand. He loved you, the older woman said simply. The real you, the one we saw behind whatever game you were playing. That's why this hurts him so much. I love him too, Isabel whispered. I never meant for any of this to happen. Intentions matter less than actions, minha filha, Elena replied gently. Sometimes love isn't enough to bridge the gap created by betrayal. The conversation left Isabel feeling more lost than ever. She had won countless business battles, negotiated billion-dollar deals, but she had no strategy for healing a broken heart. His or her own. Lucas tried to help in his own way. The bet's off, he declared when she finally told him everything. This got too complicated. We'll both make the charitable donations and call it even. But Isabel barely heard him. Money, which had always been her measure of success, suddenly seemed meaningless. She would have given every penny she owned to go back to that evening on the fire escape, eating ice cream and holding Daniel's hand. As weeks passed, Isabel found herself changing in ways she hadn't expected. She started a foundation to provide educational scholarships for working students. She implemented new policies at her company to support working parents and provide better benefits for service staff. She began volunteering at community centers similar to the ones Daniel had shown her. But these changes, while meaningful, couldn't fill the void his absence had left in her life. She missed his laugh, his kindness, the way he saw the world with such clarity and compassion. She missed Sunday dinners with his family, the warmth and love that filled their small apartment. She missed being Sarah, not because it was a lie, but because with Daniel, it had allowed her to be the truest version of herself she'd ever known. One rainy evening, almost 3 months after their confrontation, Isabel found herself back at the Portuguese restaurant where they'd had their first real date. She sat at the same table, ordered the same dish, and allowed herself to remember every detail of that night. The way Daniel's eyes had crinkled when he smiled, how his hand had felt against her cheek, the taste of their first kiss under the streetlight. As she left the restaurant, she made a decision. She couldn't undo the past, couldn't erase the hurt she'd caused, but she could try to be worthy of the love she'd found and lost. Not for Daniel, not to win him back, but because he had shown her a better way to live, a better person to be. She would never be just Sarah again, but she could be an Isabel who carried Sarah's lessons in her heart. An Isabel who understood that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars, that real power came from lifting others up, that love, honest, vulnerable, genuine love, was worth more than all the success in the world. And maybe, someday, if fate was kind, she would have the chance to tell Daniel that he had given her the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to discover who she really was beneath the wealth and power and pretense. Until then, she would work to become someone worthy of the love they'd shared, someone who understood Tage. At the greatest challenges in life weren't about winning or losing, but about being true to yourself and the people you love.